This short story follows the last surviving scientist hiding in a deep underground bunker after the fall of civilization. He sends one final signal, pouring into it everything that remains of his purpose. When the world goes completely silent, the terminal suddenly responds. One symbol. One sign that overturns everything we thought we understood about what lies beyond Earth. You know why space is silent? Because it is terrifying. The human quest for contact had always been driven by optimism, a pervasive hope that fueled decades of actively broadcasting powerful signals into the void. This consistent, loud output of information stemmed from the assumption that any advanced extraterrestrial civilization would be benevolent. Yet, the persistent silence encountered by SETI and METI projects eventually hardened into the Fermi paradox. If the galaxy was so vast and filled with potential life, why was no one answering? The terrible truth was uncovered not through listening, but through forensic analysis of what was previously dismissed as cosmic background noise. A small team of American scientists used cutting-edge analysis in 2035 to detect subtle, widespread energy fluctuations across the galactic plane. This wasn't random static, but a highly sophisticated, pervasive echo suppression system, actively dampening high-power electromagnetic transmissions. Applying this filter to data from star systems where civilization was expected, they found absolute radio silence, not fading, but complete, surgical erasure, often preceded by a distinct, non-nuclear energy spike. The chilling realization struck them: the universe was silent because it was actively patrolled by an ancient, predatory force that systematically eliminated any civilization that broadcast its presence. Humanity, with its century of powerful, hopeful transmissions, had brightly illuminated its own location in this dark forest, and the patterns indicated their own extermination was imminent. Chapter 1: The Discovery of Silence. The sterile, windowless environment of the deep underground facility in Nevada offered no solace against the crushing weight of the data being reviewed. Dr. Aaron Chandler, his face illuminated solely by the glow of multiple high-resolution monitors displaying complex spectrograms and statistical models, felt the profound dread settling into the room. For months, the team had been poring over the anomalous energy readings, initially dismissed as noise, only to conclude that they were witnessing the digital residue of a galactic-scale suppression system. This was not the expected gentle hum of cosmic background, but the chilling aftershock of a deliberate, violent silencing. The analysis was irrefutable: several neighboring star systems, spectroscopically similar to our own and exhibiting signs of pre-collapse industrial development, had simply gone dark. Their radio signatures were not just faded, they were surgically erased, leaving behind only the fleeting, faint pattern of the echo suppression mechanism. Chandler understood the implication with a terrifying clarity that transcended mere physics: the universe was a dark forest, and we had spent a century loudly declaring our presence. He stood before the assembled representatives of the highest levels of American security and intelligence, a collection of stoic, gray-suited men and women unaccustomed to existential threats dressed in complex mathematics. Chandler presented the data meticulously, showing how our own active transmissions, METI, which were acts of optimism, had instead painted a massive target on Earth. He projected the calculated trajectory of the silence enforcement entities, which his team had codenamed the Hunters. The initial, terrifying calculation suggested a response time of approximately 20 years, based on the signal strength and distance of our furthest major broadcast. The room held its collective breath, the 20-year reprieve seeming like an eternity of agonizing preparation. However, Chandler immediately shattered that slim comfort. Rerunning the simulation against the most recent, highly confidential data gathered by a deep space probe designed to study distant gravitational waves, data obtained just hours before the briefing, the estimated arrival time collapsed catastrophically. The Hunter, designated Object Omega, was not traveling at a near-light speed from the distant target system. It was already in motion, having been triggered by a much earlier, more proximal, and higher-powered broadcast from Earth. The entity, whatever its nature, was significantly closer than anyone dared to imagine, moving with impossible acceleration. Chandler's voice, though strained, cut through the sudden, horrified silence in the bunker as he delivered the new, final calculation, the window for survival was not 20 years. It was merely 5 years. The apocalypse had already begun the moment we first shouted. The immediate, non-negotiable conclusion was a mandate for absolute global radio silence, a desperate, last-ditch attempt to dim the beacon that was Earth. The secret decision was made then and there to initiate Project Cassandra, a top-secret directive to cease all outward radio transmissions, beginning the long, silent countdown. Chapter 2, The Great Concealment. Project Cassandra moved from conceptual dread to concrete, frantic action almost instantly, shrouded in layers of national security and misdirection. The primary objective was to render Earth virtually radio-invisible to external observation while maintaining the facade of normal, technologically advanced society for its population. The scale of the undertaking was unprecedented. Massive, publicly funded infrastructure projects were launched under the guise of green energy initiatives and cyber resilience upgrades. In reality, technicians across the continental United States worked around the clock, rerouting all high-power communications, television broadcasting, cellular data, microwave links, and satellite transmissions, into shielded, high-capacity fiber-optic networks buried deep beneath the Earth. The constant, energetic hum of humanity's digital activity, which had been escaping into the void for decades, was being systematically trapped and contained. This transition was marked by widespread, frustrating outages and unexplained service interruptions, which the government skillfully attributed to the necessary complexities of modernizing the grid against sophisticated, fictional cyber adversaries. Simultaneously, a massive, globally coordinated effort began on the far side of the Moon, utilizing automated construction robots and a few human specialists operating under extreme secrecy. Their mission was to deploy a series of vast, passive, absorbers, ultra-thin, metallic oxide films designed to be electromagnetically inert, functioning as a crude, orbital veil. These cosmic screens were meant to dampen any residual radiofrequency leakage that still managed to escape Earth's atmosphere, reducing the planet's overall electromagnetic signature. The plan was not to make the Earth completely dark, which was technologically impossible given residual heat signatures and necessary communications, but to reduce its volume to that of a low-grade, naturally occurring astronomical object, hopefully below the detection threshold of the approaching object Omega. On Earth, deep beneath the Rocky Mountains, the construction of the Noah's Ark facility accelerated. This vast underground complex, designed to house the entirety of human knowledge and a highly selective cross-section of genetic and cultural material, represented the final, desperate hedge against total annihilation. The urgency was palpable, the 5-year countdown provided no allowance for delays. Amidst this frenzy of secret labor, the team monitoring deep space made a chilling confirmation. Using the newly deployed orbital observatories, they visually confirmed the existence of Object Omega. It was not a conventional starship with engine plumes or recognizable structure, it appeared as an impossibly dense, non-luminous mass, an absolute void against the starry background, moving with an eerie lack of observable propulsion. Its movement was precise and deliberate, confirming it as an artificial threat, a manifestation of the terrifying simplicity of the hunter's strategy: maximum efficiency, minimal signature. The confirmation of the object's sheer, cold reality injected a fresh wave of quiet terror into the hearts of the few who knew the truth, validating the desperate, disruptive Project Cassandra. Chapter 3, The Race Against Time. The desert facility in Nevada had long been considered a relic of an older era, a forgotten complex of concrete corridors and weather-beaten antennas scattered like skeletal remains across the sand. Yet in its subterranean levels, far below the blistering heat and indifferent wind, the air trembled with a tension that no one dared name. The research division had worked in near-total isolation for years, their purpose obscured even from those who managed the site. It was a place where day and night ceased to matter, replaced by the unbroken hum of machines and the flicker of data streams that revealed more than anyone had been meant to understand. The anomaly first appeared as a string of irregular pulses, so faint that they blended into the fabric of cosmic static. Analysts dismissed them at first as byproducts of solar interference or instrumentation errors, but the pulses persisted, threading through the noise in patterns that refused to disappear. As the data accumulated, the researchers redoubled their analysis, applying models designed to parse the architectures of artificial neural systems. What emerged defied expectation. The faint signals were neither random nor distant. They were deliberate, distributed across the spectrum with the subtle precision of something engineered to remain unseen. The realization arrived slowly, unfolding like a cold weight settling across the room. The signals formed a suppression field, a subtle mechanism woven into the very structure of the sky, its purpose hidden behind its own insignificance. Through long nights of analysis, the team mapped the suppression zones and cross-referenced them with historical observations of nearby star systems. What they uncovered had nothing to do with interstellar silence born of emptiness. Entire sectors of space, once suspected to harbor emerging civilizations, showed not the slightest trace of technological remnants. No transmissions, no echoes of industrial activity, not even the faint scatter that decaying satellites or abandoned infrastructure should have left behind. Every such system shared a common signature, a brief, violent flare in its energy output, followed by absolute radiographic absence so total it resembled intentional cleansing. The pattern repeated across hundreds of light-years, culminating in a chilling curve that intersected with Earth's own history of outbound transmissions. Humanity had been loud for a century, and the echoes of its earliest calls had reached systems that had since fallen into perfect, unnatural quiet. The review of long-range monitoring logs uncovered something worse. One of the most powerful directed signals ever sent from Earth had been aimed decades earlier toward a star that, according to reconstructed data, had undergone one of these silent erasures. The time calculations were unforgiving. If something had interpreted that signal as a marker, if something had reacted to it the way it had reacted to others, then the countdown toward response was no longer theoretical. Initial models predicted 2 decades before any potential arrival. Revised calculations, accounting for gravitational anomalies and fragments of unaccounted motion detected by orbital interferometers, reduced the estimate to 5 years. Something massive was already moving. It did not announce itself with radio noise or light. It revealed its path only through microscopic distortions in the fabric of space, the kind produced not by propulsion but by momentum, as though it were a dense, inert projectile guided with intent rather than steered with engines. Within the facility, the implications tightened around the researchers like a tightening noose. The discovery was too large, too catastrophic to share. The command structure above them reacted with immediate and suffocating secrecy. All outward transmissions were halted under the guise of routine maintenance. Surveillance systems were reassigned to the skies, searching for distortions that hinted at an approaching threat. In the depths of the facility, the team continued its work in silence heavy enough to feel alive, haunted by the timeline they had uncovered and the knowledge that the sky's quiet was not the quiet of peace. It was the quiet of something waiting for the last echoes of a marked target to fade before delivering judgment. The object moving through the void had no signature, no emissions, no familiar geometry. Yet in its shadow, the researchers sensed intention, a cold and ancient purpose woven into its trajectory. The desert above remained bright and empty, but below the earth, where the facility hummed with subdued panic, a realization had taken root: the universe was not indifferent to humanity's voice. It had heard, and something had already begun its approach. Chapter 4: The Deception. With only 6 months remaining before the arrival of the non-luminous executioner, the highly classified subterranean launch facility became the singular focal point of global tension. The pervasive fear among the few who knew the truth was almost a physical presence, driving the exhausted scientific and military personnel. Time for passive defense was over. Project Siren, the Great Lie, was the only remaining play. The message itself was an exquisite piece of technological camouflage, a brief, immensely powerful burst of coherent radio energy carrying a data packet designed to impersonate the command sequence of a highly advanced, territorial, and hostile civilization, one even older and more formidable than the presumptive hunters. It simulated not only the signature technology of an established cosmic predator but also contained a concise, untranslatable mathematical declaration of ownership and a dire warning against intrusion into a controlled zone. It was Earth's final, desperate attempt to shout not, "We are here," but, "Someone far worse is already here." The launch sequence was agonizingly slow, a precise, calculated discharge of accumulated power that briefly bypassed all the carefully constructed silence protocols. For a fleeting second, Earth once again screamed into the dark forest, but this time, the scream was intended to sound like a challenge. The burst of energy surged outwards, instantly making the planet momentarily incandescent in the radio spectrum, then silence descended once more, heavier and more terrifying than before. The next several weeks were spent in a state of suspended dread. Object Omega, visible only through its growing gravitational effects on distant Kuiper belt objects, continued its terrifyingly linear path. The scientists watched their monitors, calculating the point of no return. Initially, it seemed the deception had failed, the massive, dark entity remained unswayed. Then, approximately 2 months after the siren signal was launched, the change occurred. It was not a sudden deceleration, which would have indicated a retreat. Instead, the object executed a minute, yet critical, course correction. It was a subtle gravitational shift, undetectable to anyone but the specialized instruments of the Deep Space Network, but it was enough. Object Omega was not stopping, but it was adjusting its trajectory to miss the gravitational center of the solar system. It continued to hurtle forward, but its path was now calculated to graze the outer solar system and veer away. The danger had been averted, but not without consequence. As the massive object passed near the orbital plane, its immense gravity caused a sudden, violent upheaval. Satellites tumbled and failed, orbital debris scattered violently, and on Earth, massive, sudden subterranean stress unleashed powerful, chaotic earthquakes and colossal tidal surges that ravaged coastal regions. Earth survived the direct threat, spared by the successful deception, but it was severely shaken, paying a heavy price for its audacious lie. Chapter 5, Aftermath and a New Era. 10 years had passed since the terrifying near-miss and the gravitational shockwave delivered by Object Omega. The world that emerged from that disaster was fundamentally different, shaped by necessity and conscious restraint. The catastrophic earthquakes and tsunamis triggered by the flyby provided the perfect cover for the global implementation of the Great Reset, the final, pervasive enforcement of Project Cassandra. Much of the surviving satellite infrastructure was deemed unsalvageable or, more truthfully, too dangerous to reactivate. Communication across continents reverted to shielded, high-capacity underground fiber optic cables, effectively containing the electromagnetic noise that had once betrayed humanity. The era of casual, high-power radio usage was over. Surface life was characterized by a profound, almost eerie quietness. Localized electric grids powered by small, self-contained fusion or geothermal plants replaced sprawling national power networks, minimizing residual energy signatures. Transportation relied heavily on low-tech solutions, resurrected steam-powered rail, advanced electric bicycles, and regional, heavily regulated air travel that used tightly controlled, non-radiating navigation systems. The secret of the dark forest remained confined to the deepest levels of government and the original research team, the official narrative cementing the idea that the planet had been ravaged by solar flares and unprecedented seismic activity. Dr. Chandler, now showing the weight of decades of impossible secrecy, continued his vigil deep within the sealed bunker, overseeing the silent watch. His team, though significantly diminished by time and the inherent stress of their unique knowledge, maintained meticulous observation of Object Omega, which was now drifting inertly in the deep interstellar void, and of the calculated trajectories of other potential hunters. The success of Project Siren was now understood in its chilling complexity. The lie worked not just because the signal was convincing, but because the chaos following the gravitational shock made Earth look like a system that had already been successfully cleansed or rendered unsuitable for habitation by the hunters. The planet appeared wounded, silenced, and therefore no longer a threat requiring immediate, kinetic intervention. It was during a routine post-mortem analysis of the gravitational disturbances left in Omega's wake that Chandler discovered the true nature of the hunter's final check. Embedded within the minute data fluctuations caused by the flyby, he found the barely perceptible signature of a tiny, high-velocity probe, an inert, extremely subtle reconnaissance drone launched by Object Omega just before its course correction. This wasn't an attack, it was a verification mechanism. The probe's function was to confirm the expected radio silence and destruction following the hunter's passage. By the time the probe had reached Earth, 10 years later, humanity had largely achieved that terrifying silence. The Great Deception succeeded because the lie and the actual events on Earth coincided perfectly. Earth had gone quiet, resembling a planet already neutralized. This chilling realization solidified the new global policy: the silence must be absolute and eternal, or the next hunter would not be fooled. Chapter 6: Choice of Fate. 20 years after the near-extinction event, the weight of the enforced silence pressed heavily on Dr. Chandler, now the last living member of the original Cassandra team. His hair was thin and white, his movements slow, but his eyes, sharp and haunted, remained fixed on the console screens deep within the isolated bunker. Humanity had adapted to its reduced existence, flourishing quietly beneath the technological restrictions, but Chandler understood the fragile nature of this peace. The dark forest theory dictated that silence could never be guaranteed forever. One day, some accidental leakage or necessary expansion would betray them again. His final mission, Project Antidote, was the countermeasure, a highly complex, ultra-secure signal designed not to deceive, but to share the dreadful truth, aimed at a single, distant star system where his analysis suggested a civilization might have survived a similar culling, retreating into technological silence. The goal was to establish a collective alliance of victims, a resistance against the hunters. The decision to send the antidote signal was perpetually stalled by the government, paralyzed by the fear that any broadcast, however brief or secure, would invite immediate and final annihilation. They preferred the safety of eternal, heavy silence over the risk of potential salvation. Chandler, however, recognized that eternal silence was merely slow death. He knew his time was short, and the knowledge he held could not be buried with him. He made his final, private decision, overriding the multiple layers of security and protocol that had been put in place specifically to prevent unauthorized transmission. Moving with the methodical clarity of a man executing his final will, he initiated the launch sequence for Project Antidote. The signal was mathematically beautiful, a pristine, elegant burst of data engineered to be invisible to the hunter's brute force detection systems but instantly recognizable as a coded warning to a sophisticated, surviving civilization. It was humanity's quietest, yet most meaningful message ever sent. The powerful, directed energy beam flashed momentarily across the galaxy, and then the system returned to its profound, intended silence. Chandler leaned back, watching the clock tick, awaiting the inevitable reaction. He had gambled the fate of his species. If the hunters intercepted the faint signal, extinction would be swift. If the distant, silent civilization received and deciphered it, survival might be possible. The response, when it came, was not the roar of an approaching hunter, but a subtle, almost imperceptible echo originating from the target system. It was not a grand greeting, nor a complex data stream, but a single, profound mathematical symbol embedded within a carefully contained low-energy burst, a symbol that, according to the Antidote Protocol's theoretical decryption key, translated to quiet. We know. Arrival in. The message was cut off, the remaining data placeholder indicating a long, but definite, countdown. Chandler stared at the incomplete message, a quiet, knowing smile spreading across his face. He had reached someone. He had ended the terrible solitude. Whether the approaching arrival meant salvation or the culmination of a larger, terrifying conflict was left unanswered, but the silence had been broken by shared knowledge. He closed his eyes, his vigil finally over, the Earth irrevocably launched into the next, dangerous phase of its existence in the dark forest.